Hello, everyone. Welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Camille Meir, and I'm on the events team at the bookstore. And I'm thrilled to be welcoming Jack Livings to present his debut novel, The Blizzard Party, out from MCD Books, an imprint of Farrar, Straus, and Giroux, in conversation with the publisher of MCD Books and editor, Sean McDonald. While the pandemic has taken a toll across all of our lives, virtual programs like the one you're about to see have become bright spots in our days. So I want to give a huge thanks to Jack and Sean for joining us this evening. Just a quick note about housekeeping. You should be able to see and hear our presenters, but they can't hear or see you. So if you have a question, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and submit your question. You can feel free to do that throughout the event. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can near the end of the program. There's also a chat button where I will be down also near the bottom of the Zoom screen, where I will be posting a link to purchase tonight's book. So please keep an eye out for that chat message and click the link and buy the book. A caveat for tonight's event, we're all at the mercy of our home internet connections and server loads, so please bear with any technical issues that might arise. We'll try to solve them as quickly as we can. We'll be continuing our virtual series across the winter and the spring, so please head over to our website and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on all of our events. One that I want to point out is that next Thursday, we'll be thrilled to have Catherine Angel present her book, Tomorrow, Sex Will Be Good Again, Women and Desire in the Age of Consent, and she'll be in conversation with Kate Zambrino. Registrations for that event are live now, so please check it out on our website. So just a little bit of background about tonight's author, and then we'll get started. Jack Livings is the author of The Dog, which was awarded the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize and the Rome Prize for Literature, and was included on Best Book of the Year lists by the Times Literary Supplement and the New York Times. His short stories have appeared in Best American Short Stories and have been awarded 2 Pushcart Prizes. The Blizzard Party is his first novel and releases today. He lives in New York with his family. All right, Jack and Sean, the virtual stage is now yours. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Camille.
Hi, this is Sean McDonald, and I'm just briefly going to introduce myself. I'm the publisher of MCD and an executive editor at FSG. I've worked with Jack on 2 books now. I came in at the end of The Dog, and then we worked on this together. And I think Jack's going to start us off with a quick reading from The Blizzard Party.
Okay, thanks, Sean. And first, just to say thanks to everybody who's out there. Thank you, Camille, for moderating this, and a huge thanks to Community Books for hosting us. If you're thinking about buying a book, if I don't convince you otherwise by the end of this, it would be great if you would get it from Community. If you happen to be on the other side of the world, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but indie bookstores are having a tough time right now, but they're doing an awful lot to support writers with Zoom events like this. So it's nice to pay it back to them. And so again, thanks to Community. So I'm just going to read really briefly from the second chapter of my book. It's called The Blizzard Party. There's a blizzard. It's 1978. It's New York City, and there's a party. And a boy named Vikram Patel in this scene, who was 13, has been out wandering around in the snow, looking at snowflakes through his microscope. And he comes across an old man named Albert Caldwell, who is incoherent and wandering in the snow. And all Caldwell can tell Vikram is that he lives in a big apartment building on the Upper West Side. Can't tell him what apartment he lives in. So Vikram shuttles him back to the big building, and there's a madhouse in the lobby. So they can't find the doorman, and Albert has gone completely silent. And Vikram says, well, I'll just get on the elevator with everyone else and go to the top where the party is, and someone there has got to know this old guy. So this is what happens when they enter the party. Inside, the entrance gallery was dim and thick with smoke, not the painterly striations that hang suspended in opium dens like the gossamer robes of angels, but a searing, heavy storm of smoke that had established itself as the essential medium through which all commerce would be conducted. The Joan Mitchell hanging directly across from the door was nothing but a hint of blue through a fog bank. Entire bricks of marijuana had been combusted and were presently lounging around in cottony clouds, mingling with enough R.J. Reynolds, Bright Leaf, and Burley to balance the North Carolina state budget. Here and there, microclimates, the sharp masculinity of cohibas, toros, presidentes, ascots, perfectos, chisels, canoodling with feminine curls of drums, Sir Walter Raleigh, Borkham Riff, Sutliff Vanilla Custard, Prince Albert, like a descant, the mysterious perfume of cloves everywhere, nowhere. In darker corners, the harsh burn of beaties. Enterprising young Tanawat Kankaitum, known to his friends at Columbia as Highwatt, after Pete Townsend's customary stack, had set up a pair of multi-hose hookahs in the library and was charging the exorbitant sum of $8 US for a bowl of shisha and hash. He was doing a bang-up business, but it was getting crowded as the remains of his previous customers were taking up all the floor space. They were great for marketing, but Christ on a bicycle, Highwatt said to a woman in 4-inch spikes who was walking across an unresponsive carpet of bodies, "Step right up." Vic, now looking for somewhere to stow Albert while he inquired about where exactly in the building the old man lived, was blown away from the pulsing heart of the party like a sloop caught in a squall toward the residential wing by the excruciating volume of the song, Iggy Pop grinding out Lust for Life on about its 8th curtain call. To the east were 6 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms that branched off a dark central hall lined with cubist paintings, couples making out, triangular shadows, more smoke, one of Hiwatt's customers sleeping Pompeii style atop a Nelson bench, and underfoot a foreboding tangle of clothing. The doors were all closed, and Albert stood docile at Vic's side as he rapped on the first one. Impossible to hear anything over the noise. He cracked and peeked and saw, oh yeah, an orgy, or group action, at least definitely XXX, if not a full-scale Dionysian revel. Pumping asses and hairy bellies, the juxtaposition and rejuxtaposition of arms over arms, the dull flash of jewelry glinting in the oily light from the bedside lamp, which had been boudoired with an orange paisley silk. He lingered, but withdrew before the shoe hit the door. Too amped up now to rethink his process, he tried the next one. It was a bathroom. A couple was in the tub. Another was attempting to destroy the toilet with their ride-em cowboy antics. Water everywhere, yipping. It smelled like sandalwood and patchouli. The next, a bedroom, another group fling, a more Germanic arrangement, 2 women on the bed, 5 men around the edges, pants pulled around their ankles, and what appeared to be a game of cribbage underway at the table beneath the window. Albert lingered dreamily at Vic's side. Hot damn, Vic thought as he reached for door number 4, his fingers trembling with voyeuristic ecstasy. Alas, the room he was about to enter was virtually empty. I was the stain on that virtue, sleeping peacefully on the bed beneath a blanket of cyan TV snow, alone, unperturbed, because no matter how perverse the diabolical plans and the drug-soaked brains of the partiers, by some miracle, none of them included getting it on in front of, with, or around a little girl. So it was, with a mixture of relief and disappointment, Vic parked Albert on a creaky teak chair next to a wooden statue of a Maasai herder, taking care not to wake the kid sacked out atop the coverlet. He had no idea how old I was, a little kid, that was how I registered. And he whispered to Albert that he'd be back soon. What a thoughtful boy. Having secured the addled old man, he closed the door behind him and went to find an adult who might be able to tell him where Albert, who had nothing to say on the matter, lived.
All right. Thank you, Jack. So this party scene goes on for a little bit. And to me, it's just completely virtuosic, the way you crafted the scene. And I'm curious, is the party scene the first thing you wrote? Is this where the book started in terms of process?
No. That's a tough one. I mean, it started, the whole book started, I had this idea about 10 years ago about a guy who was a spy. And he was a good spy in the sense that he was forgotten the instant he left any room. He could blend in anywhere. He looked like the Invisible Man. I mean, he was nowhere, no matter where he was. And I was noodling around with this idea about this guy named Irwin Saltwater, and started making notes on index cards, and built his character long before I had any place to put him. And I think the party came along a few years later, because I knew I wanted to set the book in 1978, because that's when my mom and I left New York. And I was born in 74. I was little when we left, but I have lots of memories, and it was a big year for me. I don't remember the blizzard. I was here for the blizzard. It hit in February 78. I have no memory of it, but anyone who was in New York at the time who was old enough that I mentioned this to remembers it. It was a pretty big deal. And the more I thought about it, I thought, well, of course, I mean, it's late 70s, Upper West Side, New York. I mean, how many parties are there going to be? Like at least 2,000 during a blizzard. Sure. So I just picked one. Yeah, it's a good question. I wish I knew exactly where it popped in the process, but it was after lots of other decisions had been made, as often happens, you know.
So that decision to write in 1978 New York, was that, and what did that mean for you? Did you have to immerse yourself in lots and lots of research, or was it more organic than that?
So, I mean, so, you know, you and I worked on The Dog together, and that book was so research heavy. It was a book, I mean, for those of you who don't know, if anybody doesn't know, it was a book of short stories set in China. And I was very, very careful with my research, and I was very, very careful with the form of the stories. And it was a very conservative process, very controlled process of trying to write while encapsulating everything I had learned doing my research, the weird translation from Chinese into English that I was writing in. And it really wore me out. Like, it was a really tiring process. And I was constantly like, God, I wish I could just use this phrase, but I can't use this American idiom because no Chinese character would use this American idiom. So I have to spend 2 days finding the right Chinese idiom. So I got through doing that and thought, all right, now I'm going to make it easy on myself. I'm going to write about New York, because I live here. How hard could it be? I was here in the 70s. I came back to see my dad through the late 70s and through the mid 80s. Piece of cake, right? And it's like, it was so much worse. It was so much worse, because I was not intimately familiar with the political scene. And you have an idea, you see a pair of bell bottoms or something, and you know where you are, and you think, oh, I know this, but not well enough to write about it. So I wound up reading a lot of old copies of the New York Times, which is fun. I like that. I like the ads the best. I think old ads for for Saks Fifth Avenue are the best. It's like these insane fur coats that'll keep you turning pages. Yeah. Did I answer your question? I'm sorry, I sort of.
Yeah, you absolutely answered my question. Thank you. So in that evolution of the book, when did Hazel Saltwater come into the Blizzard Party?
Yeah. So she was there. It took me, I really started working in earnest on this in 2014, 2015. And she was there as a character. I had written about 300 pages of it. And then by the good graces of the American Academy in Rome, got to go spend a year in Rome working on this book exclusively. And I showed up in Rome with about 300 pages, but it was in third person. And it was very much focused on Albert Caldwell, who's this old lawyer who has dementia. And is dealing with a trauma that has torn his family apart, and was really kind of the emotional driver for the whole book. But I was looking, 75 degrees in the wrong direction. I got to Rome, and Hazel just emerged. I have a theory about what happened, which is that Trump got elected, and I was thinking about conspiracy theories a lot. I was reading a lot of Thomas Pynchon, and really going down wormholes, because a conspiracy theory is basically a really good piece of fiction that leads the reader or the person on the receiving end of conspiracy theory to create this whole world for themselves, which is what you're trying to do with a book. You do 50% of the work as the writer, and the reader does the other 50%. And the book was very much about a false world. It was about play acting and things that people do to get through and to deal with what's happened in their lives. And I think Hazel sort of showed up one day and said, I can tell this story a little bit better than you can in third person. Why don't you let me take it from here? And she built this conspiracy theory about, she truly explained to me what the book was about, which was her life and the restructuring of her life by her own father, before she ever really had a chance to get started with her life. So it was her excavation. And I was hanging out in Rome with archaeologists and like historical scholar types whose brains are so packed with information. And at the same time, there were artists there who look at the world in a completely different way than I do artistically, where they see connections that I never saw. And I think all of these things were kind of colliding at the same time. And which is, I think, partially why the book goes in at least 114 different directions before it all, I think it all comes back around in the end. But there was a lot of artistic fermentation going on. It's nice. And I think she arose out of that.
The book's been celebrated for being overstuffed, I guess. And a reviewer accused you of putting every thought you've had into the book, which I think you might dispute based on our experience. And I thought people might want to hear a little bit about that process. You've indicated where some of that.
Yeah, well, that was really,
where that started. But.
Yeah. So when I got back from Rome, what did I show up with? I give you 700-page manuscript to deal with. I was like the least excited I've ever seen you about anything. like, oh, great. And I really thought I was done. I came back and I was like, I'm going to do one more polish on this. I polished it in September and October. And I was like, okay, I got it. I nailed it. And so I gave it to Sean, everybody. And he came back about a month and a half, 2 months later. And I was like, you didn't nail it. You got in the ballpark, but no, actually he didn't get in the ballpark. We did about 5 more drafts after that, I think. And it was really, really overstuffed because I had cut it down to 700 from like 900 at one point. It had just swollen, and that's the danger of sitting around like lounging on a couch half the day reading Gravity's Rainbow, is you think you can do just about anything on the page. And but that was also by design. I mean, I shouldn't dismiss that, because I really, again, after I finished writing the stories and the dog, I said, I don't want any blinders. I just want to see what happens if I let it all go and include everything. And I interviewed Salman Rushdie a long time ago for the Paris Review, and he had this phrase. He talked about an everything in the kitchen sink novel, and that kept rattling around in my head. And I was like, why not? You know. And also, it's about New York. I mean, New York is everything in the kitchen sink. So it seems like the form fits the content in that sense. But yeah, I mean, those of you who are watching, Sean's approach, Sean would never say to me, actually, you didn't nail it. He would ask questions about the text and say, what about this? Maybe a little more here, a little less there. And then would kind of send me off to go figure it out on my own, which is, I think, the sign of a really good editor, because you can't rewrite somebody else's stuff, especially when they're as stubborn as I am. So, and we did that over and over and over again for a couple of years. I kept coming back to you, and we got closer and closer and closer to the thing that it is now, the book that ate my life.
Well, yeah, certainly one of the things or maybe the one thing you learn early in editing is that, yeah, you can't be rewriting things or you're making a bigger problem than you already have. But you mentioned that in that first round of overstuffing, that's where you got Hazel. And I think you're going to read to us a little bit more and maybe tell us a bit more about Hazel, who we have glimpsed, but
okay. So Hazel's husband died in the North Tower on 9/11, and she spends a lot of the book not saying that he died, but that he disappeared, and she's harboring this kind of belief that maybe he, instead of going to work that morning, went and got on a ferry and went across the river to Jersey, and then just kept on going. When he saw the towers go down, he thought, I'll just keep walking, and walked until he got on a boat in San Francisco and wound up in China and kept. And so she's the book is very much about her grief. It's how she processes her grief in these insane ways that we process grief. So a few years after 9/11, the 9/11 predominantly took men. I think 70-80% of the people who died were men, because these offices, these investment banks and hedge funds were predominantly male staffed. And so there were, and still are, so many widows. And the widows, I imagine, have an incredible sad bond. And so Hazel was talking to one of her widow friends one day, and she noticed that her friend Eden she didn't look quite as awful as she was supposed to. And so Eden said, yeah, I found this thing that you can do. And Hazel said, what? And she said, they'll fix it for you. Well, they won't fix it, but they'll recreate what happened and put you in the middle of it. And so there's this business that physically recreate the fall of the tower. And Eden had done this, and it had somehow brought her, I hate the word closure, but it had gotten her closer to understanding what had happened to her husband. And so Hazel said, okay, I'll try it. And they call these mock-ups complications, like a watch complication, the gears on the inside of the watch. So this is Hazel's first run of a complication. On the appointed day, they sent a car to deliver me to the compound upstate on the Wallkill River. They layered me in Nomex, full hood, motorcycle government. Breathing apparatus, 40 pounds of shielding, ushered me onto the office floor where I stood among my husband's colleagues, professional stuntmen and women I now know, variously hammering at their keyboards or sucking on coffee cups with a foot on the file cabinet or watching the news. And there was this one guy who had a phone to his ear, nodding, scribbling on a pad. And it was he who got my attention because I wanted to know what he was writing. Gibberish, doodling interlocking benzene rings, or had he so committed himself to the role that he had collected research on deals the firm would have been tracking that morning and was jotting from memory so that I, the participant, might in some way benefit from his method approach. I stood against the back wall in my green EOD suit, peering out through the acrylic visor at the scenery, and there above the windows, Eden was right, what a view. Were the LED clocks for London, Singapore, Tokyo, Frankfurt, Buenos Aires, Shanghai, Milan, New York, and it was 8:42 by my request. And when I said ready into the hands-free, the colons on the LEDs began to flash and I prepared to die. I'd spent a month under the supervision of a psychologist, but when it was showtime, I didn't feel like I was Vic or myself or an all-seeing eyeball. I felt like I was a stranger to us both, someone who paid an outrageous sum of money to participate in an outrageous stunt in the name of distraction. I felt crass and dishonest and utterly American. I had a long 4 minutes to consider the implications of what I'd undertaken, the fiction I was creating, the familiar sense of life that are removed from life. I had time to consider the presence of Albert Caldwell within me. Yes, still there, always there, either directing me toward or away from the truth, from his frozen little cave. I couldn't tell which. I could never know, my existence being a dictatorship of ignorance. And at the mark, the windows erupted and fire stormed through the space, a rolling, rippling flood of plasma, incinerating carpet and paper, carbonizing the ceiling tiles, roaring like river rapids, exerting an unexpected force, a physical force. What I expected, seaweed lapping at my legs, lambs licking at lilacs, tongues of flame and all that. Certainly not this godlike presence crushing me from all sides, reducing, suffocating, combusting within me. The flaming analysts had all dropped safely into the subspace through trap doors. And when the ceiling collapsed, my puckering throat sucked at the deoxygenated atmosphere, even though the EOD suit had been reinforced with a carbon fiber cage, so that I was wearing, in essence, a protective refrigerator, and the O2 was flowing normally. The crushing panic was only my neurons hurtling along ahead of the physical sensation, playing the odds. And as I lay pinned beneath the rubble, panting, stinging sweat steering my lips, the screech of steel girders shearing from their mounts piped into my headset, rebar screaming as it knotted and broke. I recalled my training and opened my eyes so that I might take in the same darkness as Vic, had he been there. Had he been there, and had he survived the initial impact. Tiny flame danced around in the little pocket of rubble before my eyes, gobbling up oxygen that, had Vic been trapped there, could have sustained him for just a few seconds more. A bright red combustion thread crawled across a wafer of ceiling tile wedged against my helmet. Soon that light too flickered and dimmed and died. The rubble shifted now and then, and I watched and breathed and listened.
So this is obviously a very New York City novel, from the passages you've read, and I promise the rest too. How do you feel about publishing a New York City novel right now into this weird moment for New York City?
Yeah, it's, it's funny. I've watched a little bit of the Fran Lebowitz show that Martin Scorsese directed, and I feel like she has some interesting things to say about New York occasionally. And she said in one episode that New Yorkers' conception of New York is the New York as it was when they arrived, if that makes sense. So you showed up in 69, that was New York to you, and it's all gone to hell since then. I mean, that's the continuum. It's always all gone to hell. Like, even if you just showed up last year. But my memory of New York, my core memory of New York, is when the subways were coated in graffiti. I remember the way they smelled. I remember the way the brakes smelled. I remember the lights flickering. I remember walking down West End between 79th and 80th and seeing a guy relieving himself on the sidewalk, at noon on a Tuesday. So that's, and then I moved away for a long time, and I grew up in an idyllic place with a big family. And then when I moved back in 2002, it was a completely different city where you didn't expect to be hit on the head if you walk down a dark alleyway or something. And so my conception of what's happening in New York right now is it's gotten a lot quieter, which I don't hate, because I'm essentially a solitary being, and I like it to be quiet when I'm trying to work, and it's less crowded. But what's still there is all of this life, and the life, I realize, comes from the people who are in their mid-20s predominantly, and they are just straining at this membrane that they're going to bust through when the masks can come off. And already, I mean, restaurants, the sheds they've set up on the street are packed with kids on weeknights. I mean, just packed. And I don't think about whether or not it's safe anymore, because I can't. But because I've been here the whole time, it ceased to all seem very weird to me. But last April, I remember walking across town to Union Square, and at 9 o'clock at night, and you could walk in the middle of the street down 14th. There was nobody around. Occasionally you saw a cop. That was really weird. So this feels like a recovery to me. And even still, like, the whole place feels like it's this kind of fantasy land compared to West End and 80th that I remember when I was a kid. I love the West End and 80th that I remember from the late 70s, but this is not so bad too. I like raising kids here now as opposed to then. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how everybody else feels about it. I hope reading a book about New York that's not a happy-go-lucky book is not too heavy for everybody. Spring's coming. I've been told.
Yeah, overall, you seem very optimistic about New York City.
Yeah.
And
it's not
where we'll be.
Very New Yorkerish of me. I mean, it's going to get better, but it's all going to be downhill from here, right? I mean, that's the standard.
Were there any particular New York books or even city books, I guess, that you were especially aware of as you were writing this?
I'm sorry, say that again. I was especially
aware of, like trying to join, I guess.
I mean, Philip Roth. I mean, he's more of a New York guy, but not so much the city. I think I feel like I did this with the dog too. I didn't want to read a whole bunch of contemporary Chinese literature when I was working on it, because I don't want to get scared away from what I'm working on. So I didn't particularly seek out fiction about New York. But I mean, it's kind of hard not to run across it anyway. But I was much more under the influence of Pynchon, if anybody. That Gravity's Rainbow was really the thing that I read, and I felt everything loosen up. Nobody can do what he does in that book. I mean, this book does not hold a candle to his, but it gave me a lot of space to breathe. And so it was more of a literary space that I was trying to operate in than a municipal zone.
In those 5 drafts you mentioned, or more, I feel like part of what you were fighting for was to preserve that Pynchon influence. Is that something that does that feel accurate to you, or?
Yeah, and I think it was a bad impulse, because you never, I mean, that's where you were so helpful, is that stuff has to be wrung out, because it doesn't, I'm not him. I don't write like him, and I don't, I want to write like myself, but it always looks better to the writer on the page if it reads like someone they admire. And then you give it to your friend to read it, or your editor, and it's all discombobulated and it's false, and none of it rings true, because it's coming from somewhere outside of you. So, I hadn't really thought about this, but just now that we're talking about it, I think that was what we were doing, was flushing a lot of that extraneous influence out of the book, so that it could actually become something that I had written, and knew. I mean, it's always like trying to draw a portrait in the dark anyway. Like, you have a great idea in your head and you can't see the canvas, and you turn the lights on and it's a mess. That, I think that's standard operating procedure. But yeah, and that's another reason I think influence scares me. I don't know if anybody likes to really confess to being influenced by anyone, but I can't but help it with this one.
We just have a few more minutes, I think, before we're going to turn over to questions. But I'm curious to come back to Hazel a little bit, mostly to ask you if there's a kind of a sprawling cast of characters, and I'm curious if you had favorites among them, or a favorite, and when that might have, when those characters might have joined the party.
I really like Bo Vornello, or sorry, Bo Vernado. I changed his name at the very last, like one of the last drafts. And Bo is a total alpha male, like Yale, Harvard, like never had an impediment he couldn't smash through, and he's just beyond wealthy and loves to smoke weed and collect things because he can. And there's something about he for me embodied the pure mercantile spirit of the city, in that it just consumes it consumes everything. It sometimes feels like everything here is a marketing ploy. Everything is about capitalism. Everything is about, how do I make a buck out of this? And he was just like this open mouth, inhaling everything in his path. And he's not reprehensible. He behaves, and his interior thoughts are reprehensible in many places, but there is a spark of decency in him that made him okay to me. Like, he's not a villain or anything. He's just, you might read him and go like, oh my God, this guy, like, come on. But I hope you're also kind of like, kind of know this guy. Like, give me a little more of this dirtbag. I like, those people are fun to write. They're, yeah, and ask me tomorrow, I might say somebody different. But it always also feels like the side characters wind up being the most fun, because they put you through the least trouble. Sometimes they're the purest distillation of what you want them to be, and they're kind of like, great, I'll just go be that guy. And Hazel put me through the ringer, and her dad put me through the ringer, and so. But I like her mom a lot. I like her mom an awful lot. She's not as present in the novel as I wish she could have been, but when she's there, I think she's smart, and she reminds me of my mom in a lot of ways.
I think it's our time to turn it over to
Questions?
the questions from the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start reading out a few. We have a lot. So one fun one to start for Jack. During the writing of the novel, what was the best writing day you had and what was the worst? Or if you can even think of some specific days that were particularly good and particularly bad.
It's a great question. I can't think of specific days, but they're definitely, in Rome, there were definitely days because I've finally got to work consecutively for days and then weeks and then months in a row, which I had not been able to do for really like 15, 20 years. Once the ball is really rolling, like sometimes I would get up at the end of the day and kind of have a warm, and my skin would be cold and my core would be really warm. And I felt like I had, I don't know, elevated or something. I was in a different space. And that happened not all the time, like, you know, once every couple months. Most days it's pretty awful. I think most days are pretty bad, like grinds, and you don't want to do it. And as soon as I've ever thought it's getting easier, you know, it's like, why the next day I sit down, like it's impossible again. So yeah, I wish I should make a point that I should keep a journal of like, that was a good day, and frame it like as a reminder that there are really good days. All the bad ones kind of blend together. It's sort of like, I think maybe that's why you can keep going, is because you don't remember the specifics quite so much, even if it was just 12 hours ago.
Mm-hmm. Kind of relating to that, I saw another question come in that was asking about how did Rome work for you as a writing setting? Did it, you know, besides like, you know, you having a lot of unbroken time to work on your novel, did the city like impact your writing at all, especially considering this is a novel set in New York? Like, you know, what was it like writing it from somewhere like Rome?
Yeah, I mean, distance is always good for me. I know some writers work better when they're in the midst of what they're writing about. I tend to benefit from a little bit of space. Mm-hmm. And then the process itself, Rome is, to me, it feels like it runs on geological time. Like it's just temporally in a completely different space, certainly than New York, where everything like should have happened yesterday. It's like nothing can happen fast enough here. You can't keep up. And I had to do much less of the bringing myself down. I didn't have to get up at like 4 a.m. to write where it was peaceful, because Rome to me, I mean, in this place too, the American Academy is this idyllic place that if you can't do it there, it's because you can't work when it's peaceful. You need to work in a war zone, like you're one of those writers. But yeah, I mean, my whole relationship to time and changed when I was in Rome, and also being able to work like a regular schedule made it much easier to put it down at the end of the day and then go out and see this beautiful, amazing city and like see our Roman friends who also run on geological time. You know, it's like, you want to meet at 3? Like, sure, let's meet at 3. And like they show up at 7. But then they'll stay for like 6, 7 hours, and you don't mind because they're lovely, wonderful, like warm. It was great. Like the book would have happened without Rome, but it would have taken me 3, 4 more years. I'd still be in the middle of it right now.
Kind of speaking to the length of the process, someone just asked that, you know, you had a child during the process of writing your book. Did that influence the schedule that you had in mind for the novel, or the content of the novel, or anything?
It's a really interesting question. He showed up late in the process. I think Sean and I had already traded 2 or 3 drafts by that time. So, the timing was really, really lucky in that when he was really tiny and slept a lot, that's when I was really finishing things up, and when he really started getting ornery and like coming online. I think that probably also influenced like the lunch Sean and I had, where I said, I think I'm done now. He's like, oh, are you? I said, yeah, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm sick of the book. But also that definitely played into it. And my kids, I mean, all of my kids are, you know, Hazel Saltwater has so much of my daughter's in her, and things that I learned from them that I wouldn't know about being a 6-year-old girl, like, you know, lining the toes of the seam of your stockings up on the end of your foot. Otherwise, it's a snarl. Like I wouldn't think about that, but you know, you can't go to school unless those things are lined up right.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I saw a question come in that it's kind of seems to want more elaboration about Hazel Saltwater and what it was like for you to write from that perspective. And have you kind of written from or embodied the perspective of a child in previous writing? Like, did it feel incredibly different? Do you feel like it's something that you will tend towards or do again or not do again in future work?
Yeah, it's a great question. If the character shows up that needs to be written and happens to be 7 or 8 or 9, I would absolutely do it again. You know, I mean, just because Hazel is a girl doesn't mean that I wasn't 6 too. And so there's an awful lot of me in her, and this sort of, she listens, she spends a lot of time listening and kind of floating from room to room, and I think that was very much my childhood, kind of listening to what was going on and trying to, you know, ponder out what was happening. And so yeah, I mean, the thing is, I mean, for me, the characters, like, it takes me years and years and years to get a character to do this, but eventually the character will present him or herself, and then I can sort of just grab on and transcribe what's happening, and it feels much less like I'm trying to create a character. Yeah, I mean, writing a child is very interesting, and when I started the whole process, my oldest daughter was half the age that she is now. She's 16 now, so I was definitely stealing from her. She was a model.
Someone asked or mentioned, you know, that so much of their early experience of New York consisted of traces of other heritages, other ethnicities, and they're wondering, like, you know, did have such exposures and traces entered your novel, and if so, how? You know, in the writing itself, or in the characters you portray, or in any other ways.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, you know, I mean, New York is New York, and you know, the thing about this book is that it is set, the building I set it in is based on a massive, very fancy building on the Upper West Side. And it was in the late 70s predominantly a white building. And I don't actually know, I didn't do any research on what their policies were or anything, but I don't know if they even had any. But that was definitely a thought that I had. The staff in the building, I drew from not any particular ethnicity, but the super in the building where I was when I was a kid on the Upper West Side. I think, you know, Hazel's, so I mean, I don't know if there's any, this is not like a spoiler or anything, but everybody comes to New York. And Hazel's husband is named Vikram Patel, and he's the 13-year-old Vic who delivered Albert to the room where she was asleep when she was 6, and his dad had come over from India for reasons of money. I mean, and because he was a traveler, an explorer, like he had and I feel like that's, it's impossible unless you're writing with a very narrow focus not to include all of that in a New York book. That said, I mean, that was something I thought about a lot, because I thought about who's in this building, who lives here, what is their relationship to race and to culture, and I thought even the bit characters.
So one person is asking about how, you had mentioned both of you had mentioned working through 5 drafts of the novel together, and would you say that level of time given to like editing an acquired manuscript continues to be common in publishing, since schedules can be so kind of like rushed and expedited? Did you have to fight or make a lot of cases for that time for the both of you?
Let's see. I don't think it's that uncommon, honestly, to do that much with a novel. I mean, you never want to put a book out there that doesn't feel complete and doesn't feel finished and doesn't feel like what, the best version of what the author wants to create. And that's the thing that takes time. As Jack indicated, like, this manuscript got very long. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's much faster, sometimes it takes a lot longer. But no, I don't think we ever felt any particular pressure to get it out there. I mean, we also benefited from Jack writing, what feels to me like a kind of timeless story. It's not like we were trying to hook it onto something or to, ride a moment. So, and we did just happen to pick a month with a giant blizzard in New York City. So we were really just timing it for that.
Yeah, I would just also add that Sean let me blow through my deadline about 7 years ago. I mean, if we were going by the contract, I would have delivered the book in 2015, I think. So he was very generous with me.
Definitely seems to have worked out. And someone asked, kind of relating to the not serendipity, but just the fact that, it's about a blizzard and it published at this point. Do you think that for Jack, like having no memory of the actual blizzard created extra kind of space that you needed to make fiction of it? Like, or do you feel like your memory would have intruded compared to other memories you had of the city? Like, did having specifically no memory of the blizzard change how you wrote about it?
It's interesting. The party itself is really, really loosely based on a party that I remember going to at my dad's apartment in, like, I don't know, it would have been like 81, 82. And it was like a Thanksgiving celebration, and I fell asleep under a table. But that's the only memory I have, is being asleep under a table, getting waked up and put in a bedroom. And I think that's an insightful question, because any more than that might have cooked the whole thing for me, and I wouldn't have been able to create the world. I mean, and to say, like, my dad did not live in a penthouse at all. Like, it's very fictional, except for the fact that I have this one core memory. And yeah, I wonder, I'm sure that you always hope that if you have a memory of something like the blizzard, that it would enhance the fictional effect, and not completely derail the whole thing. Because I'm sure there are things that I could have added that would have made it better or more lifelike somehow. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting thought. Probably so. It's probably easier to do if it's all constructed in here.
I think we'll this can be the last question. I think it's a good one to end on. Now that the book exists in the world and can't be changed, the question asker is wondering how you feel like you've changed after the process of writing it. Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing. I'm writing a much shorter novel right now. like I put fences up again, like I did with the stories, and I want to write a short, contained. Watch, in 7 years we'll be back here again with some 900-pound gorilla thing. But I intend to write a much shorter, more plotted novel, because this was unruly. This was it's a sprawler, and I had to figure out how to tie it all together as I was going, and I think there are easier ways to do it. And I can conceive now of at least the general outline of a novel in my head, whereas I don't think I could do that when I started this. So, this book itself is also, I guess all books are this, but they're the story of the writing of the book to some to a greater extent than others. But this one, because it's about a novelist and it's about rewriting a book that a novelist already wrote, and that's not incidental, I think. And I hope never to have to do that again. Because when I was a kid, I used to hate reading books with writers in them. I was like, God, it's cheating. That's so lame. Why don't you get out of the house once in a while, write about somebody else? Oh well. Good luck next time.
And I guess we have just a couple more minutes, so I'll just one last question, because I think it's a good one to end on. It's about just who you imagine, like when you're writing, who do you imagine will be reading? And I feel like it's, who do you imagine to be your audience, or who do you picture when you're writing, and for this book in particular, as well as the rest of your writing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nabokov. Kidding. Didn't he say like he imagined himself as his ideal audience? I have a cousin who I have over the years repeatedly thought about as the audience for some reason, and I because I think she's a sharp reader, she's a smart person, and she's sensitive, and I at some point I start worrying about what Sean is going to think. It transitions to like, is this going to, once the editorial process starts, the audience becomes, my overlord editor, like, can I satisfy the queries he's given me? It's funny, I would say my wife, but she, I don't worry about what she thinks. I don't feel like she's going to love me any less if I do or don't write it well. But there's some people that I have a little vested interest in, and I'm trying to stay in their good graces somehow. And it's not real, it's just an imagined idea. But I think about those people, like, is this smart enough for them? Is this satisfactory? Will this work? Yeah, it's very complicated, that question of audience. It's very complicated. And I don't, so many writers say they don't think about the audience. And I guess some people don't. I also think half of them are lying about it. There's got to be somebody, because it's a communion. It's an act of communion. I mean, you're trying to have a conversation with somebody. Who? I mean, maybe it's just yourself. Anyway, that's a great question, and I have a terrible time answering it every time I get asked.
Well, I thought that was wonderful from the both of you. Thank you so much for taking the time tonight to do this event.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone.
Yeah, thanks for
coming.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Wonderful questions. All right. Have a good night. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.